Thank you so much, Marilyn, and thank you all for coming. It's so wonderful to have this almost fireside chat. For my presentation, I will elaborate on the type of work that I do as a ceramic artist. And I've brought a couple of slide presentations to take you through my work and to show you my inspiration for what I do. The first slideshow will show the details of how that work has come about and the evolution of my work towards interactive sculpture, which has become my specialty. The second will show you samples of what visually inspires me as an artist, and that will be interwoven with some of my works. After these two presentations, I've brought along something to do a little demo for you about a certain technique, and then I'll be pleased to answer your questions and to let you have a look at my work up close. As a ceramic artist, I have developed a strong interest in interactive sculpture. These are works that are multi-component and can be rearranged to have different expressions of the work to be experienced by the viewer and the person who rearranges them. I refer to myself as a ceramic artist and or a ceramicist as opposed to a potter. I have great admiration for the very noble job of being a potter, but for me, I'm not about function. My interest is in expression and interaction and more one of a kind in terms of what I'm going for rather than multiples. And so because function is not at the forefront of what I do, I therefore call myself a ceramic artist. Before my work in clay, I was a professional musician for all of my adult life, and earlier I actually began teaching when I was in high school. I remain a dedicated professional musician, but as music is a temporal art, when I was drawn to start to work in clay, some very interesting questions came up for me. Musical phrases exist only when we're playing them, for good or for bad. If we've done something we really like, we can't hold on to it anymore. And if we weren't so pleased with what we did, luckily it's gone. It's not existing anymore. However, immediately when I began working in clay, I realized that what I made was going to be there and was going to be permanent. And so this permanence actually inspired me to accelerate my technical skill to be able to be making what I wanted to make and to be able to be generally pleased with what's coming out of my hands. Over time, as I learned the basic throwing and hand building techniques for pottery making, I started making sets of things, but when I made sets, I was more interested in how those components talk to each other. So I think in that is the kernel, the seed of my draw towards making interactive sculpture eventually. Another factor that I think led me to explore the concept or find the concept of interactive sculpture was because I'm a musician, and each time I perform a work, it comes out slightly differently, and I like that. And when I'm dealing with permanent objects, they can seem rather static. And so it was this idea of trying to figure out the way that the work can be more lively and can have different expressions that drew me to eventually making these interactive sculptures. In my creating and building, I use both hand building and wheel throwing techniques to create the components, which I often combine, especially in my sculptural work. For those who may not be, well, those of you who may not be familiar with wheel throwing, I've actually brought some slides to take you through the process of how something's made on the wheel, because I can't really do that here. This is where I am wedging the clay. I work primarily in porcelain. Porcelain has a very, very fine grain to it, very little grog, and so that causes it to be able to take texture in a very, very detailed way. It also causes greater contrast. The white color causes greater contrast, and so that's something that I find very, very inspiring visually to me in my work. So here, as I'm wedging the clay, I'm pushing the air bubbles, any air bubbles out of the clay to prepare it for going onto the wheel. I've made a nice ball. This is my wheel in front. I'm getting ready to put it down. I put it down, and this process is called centering. The wheel is turning, and I'm using a little bit of water, and then I'm using the friction of my hands and pressure from my hands to be able to get the clay to be exactly in the center of the wheel. So after it's been centered, I start depressing down into the middle for making this particular piece to make a hole in the middle. It's called opening up. And I'm opening up a little bit further and working on the depth of the hole in the center, and I'm compressing the floor to try to ensure that there won't be cracks on the bottom. Now I'm doing pulls. I'm drawing the clay up with my hands as the wheel is turning around. It's becoming more and more tall. This is probably about 11 inches at this point. Final pull, probably up to 12 inches. Porcelain doesn't want to go tall, so that's actually pretty tall. And now I'm finishing it. I'm removing my finger marks with what's called a rib. There are different types of ribs. This is a metal rib. One can also work with plastic ribs. I have plastic ribs that I also like for different situations. And there are also wooden ribs that are used. Now I'm taking a wooden knife to trim the bottom. Since I'm not a functional potter, I'm not really interested in making feet on the bottoms of things. So generally I'm just trimming clay off the bottom while it's still on the wheel. And there I am with a semi-first pass at the shape of an object that's probably going to be altered and added to something else. Okay. Nature has strong influence in my work. Unlike many artists who work in clay, I choose deliberately not to look at the work of other people working in clay, not other ceramic artists, not other potters, at least not generally, because I want to keep my work fresh and original. And so I look at other media and I find a lot of inspiration by looking at nature. I also use things that I have found for tools and adding texture. So these objects here are actually carved ribs, carved pieces of clay that I've fired in order to be able to make them firm enough to use on soft clay for making impressions. And then these other things are all shells and pieces of coral that I've collected on the beach. This is a photo of my kiln, loaded with greenware. Most of my work is fired twice. After it is created, assembled, and dried, I fire the work to a temperature of about 1,830 degrees. And that changes it to bisqueware. At that point, the object is solid, but it's still porous enough to be able to accept a liquid glaze. I then fire the work again, and after I've glazed it, and I bring it up to a temperature of 2,345 degrees, which completely vitrifies it. So this is now a picture of glaze, which is a pretty wonderful magical substance. This one over here says Kelly Green, and that says Vegas Red, and neither of them look particularly green or red. So that's the magic of glaze chemistry. When the work is fired and brought to higher temperatures, that's when the colorants emerge and create the different colors that we see on pottery and other ceramic work. So this is a picture of my kiln now loaded with bisqueware that's been glazed. And this is after the firing. So you can see now the color has emerged on these objects, which weren't there. The first, you don't see it. It looks fairly white and fairly tan. And now there's the colors. So this is finished work, completely finished work. That's my home that Marilyn was describing to you. It's a farmhouse, an old farmhouse from about 1850. The detached barn is where my showroom is. Everyone walks into my showroom and they say, "Do you make your work here?" Absolutely not. That's another view of the barn from over the phlox and peony cutting garden from down in the yard. And that's what it looks on the inside. There's no water in the barn, and clay is messy business. You wouldn't want me working on that beautiful floor, even if there were water in the barn. So this is basically how the showroom looks. And then upstairs is my music studio, which is converted to more show space when I have open studios and other shows at the barn. The next open studio, by the way, I always participate in Natick Artists Open Studios, and it's usually the third week in October. So this year we're looking at October 21st and 22nd. And if you'd like to hear about my open studios, I brought along my guest book, and feel free to give me your mailing address, both regular mail and email, and I'll be happy to send you a card and invitation. So, by way of background, I've chosen to show you some of my earlier work, and as I spoke about, I was mostly interested in making one-of-a-kind objects right from the beginning, as soon as I started learning. And when I chose to make sets of things, I was very interested in how they would dialogue with each other. So that was a big interest right from the beginning. So this is an early set of vessels that could be vases, or they could just be talking to each other. This is a set of nesting bowls, which I was drawn to make because of the way I cut the rims. I wanted them to be able to be flexible. So already they're starting to have a little bit of an interactive aspect. And this was the first piece that I had into a juried show. It was about the third year of my work in ceramics. I was also making lots of one-of-a-kind vases. And I was interested in structure, and this is, I call this a ewer form. And I was one day looking around our house, and I realized, wow, getting a lot of tchotchkes from all these one-of-a-kind things. And I said to my very supportive husband, I think there are a lot of tchotchkes here. Is this okay with you? And he said, oh, of course, they're beautiful. And I said, I bet you'd like to see something a little bit more useful, like plates. And he said, plates are good. So I made us a couple of dinner plates, and we enjoyed them very much. And so I thought I should make the ideal set of plates that we could use when we have guests over. So I was making my first set of plates for that purpose. And there they are. And I brought them home, and he said, they're too nice. He said, you should sell them to a gallery or something. And what I did do is I had a photograph taken of them, this photograph, and I applied to the Strictly Functional Pottery National competition. I think it was the year of 2004, 2005. And I was delighted that they were accepted. And then it's a pretty well-known national pottery show. And they actually won second prize. Oh. And they were bought by someone who collects ceramics by Japanese national treasures. Oh. So they went to a pretty special home, and I'll tell you a little secret. There was originally 8, so I kept 2 of them for us. So we do get to enjoy them. Soon after that came my first interactive sculpture, and as I mentioned, my love of nature. You can't take me anywhere without picking up rocks, and you can't, or seeds, or beautiful things. And so this is called Rocks in My Pockets, which is very often how I feel when I come back from a walk. And after I did that, it really encouraged me to think more about things that people could touch and play with. So I also decided with the little bit of functional work that I was doing that I wanted to try to introduce a playful element. And so I created this. This is called Drinks for Two. And it's a little bit of a sort of a puzzle with a coaster that comes out of the tray and the movable parts. This work actually led Ceramics Monthly to name me one of their emerging artists. And this birch effect that I did to the work is also something that's become a hallmark of some of my work through the years. Another birch piece, another interactive piece. The eggs that are in this birch bowl are rattles. So it's a very tactile, friendly piece, and viewers can pick them up and listen to the different sounds made by little pieces of trapped porcelain inside. And what follows is, this is the beginning of an interest that I took in nests and eggs. And I've created over the past 10 years many, many different varieties of nests and eggs. This is now in a collection in Maryland. And this one, I introduced crystal glaze. For the first time I started using a little crystal glaze in my work. More crystalline glaze. And then another series that I've sort of started simultaneously was called sipapu vessels. So what a sipapu is, if you're familiar with the culture of Native American Indians in the Southwest, there were Pueblo people who held their religious rituals in subterranean rooms called kivas. And sipapu is a Hopi word that describes a hole in the floor of the kiva through which it is thought that ancient ancestors passed to emerge into the world and to be present for the meetings. My sipapu vessels were inspired by this concept, and they're intended to feel spiritual in nature. And I also brought a puzzle over here. Okay, the next slides that I have assembled for you are a whole variety of different interactive sculptures. This is called Changeable Views. It's fully modular. It's a tabletop sculpture about this big. And the little windows can be left open or closed, and there are different things on the other sides. So it's meant to be able to be experienced whatever is desired by the person who is playing with it. This sculpture is called Whale Sounds. And this was inspired by listening to recordings of whales that made these very loud, large, bellowing sounds that added in really thin, high sounds. People often ask me, if I blow on that, will it make a whale sound? No. But you can evoke a sound from some of them. This is called Fingertips. And the challenge for me with this piece was to create something where you have absolutely no idea what's happening on the other side of the work until you visit the other side. Just sort of like our own fingertips, but in a more in-your-face way. And that last piece, this piece, and the next piece all use a technique called shellac resist, which is what I'm going to demonstrate for you. The little black dots here are actually raised, as were the lines on these vessels. You can feel them with your hand, they're raised up. And this is also a trompe l'oeil piece, because in addition to the little black dots that are raised, there are also holes into which the little nails can be inserted. And that leads me to this piece, which is a fairly tall tabletop sculpture called Interactive Sculpture Number 9. And this was my first piece that was published in a book. It was published in a contemporary sculpture book, and I brought that book on the table for people to look at if they're interested. Same thing, same idea, trompe l'oeil. When all the sticks are out, you can't really tell that there are holes there. And I'm always very excited when people play with the sticks when they come visit me at my studio and describe for me what those sticks evoke for them, because many different things are evoked for people. And for me, one of my sculptures is really, really successful if it evokes many different things for different people. Sort of taking off on the series of nest and eggs, this is called Eggshell Nest. And it's a very large eggshell which holds broken eggshells inside. And this is made with through a technique called porcelain paper clay, where I pulverize paper fiber and add it to the clay body, and it enables me to build with porcelain in the way that it doesn't want to be built. Porcelain does not want to be super, super thin if made by hand, and it also does not want to be tall. And the paper fiber gives it strength so that it's able to really be built bigger and have some tooth. So when the piece is first made with the paper fiber in it, it's extremely strong, and then when it's fired, of course the paper burns out, so it becomes extremely fragile. So this very large piece is actually very lightweight, maybe only weighs about 1.5 pounds.
Is that common?
Using, creating paper clay?
Yeah.
There are other artists who do it, and many artists use it for different purposes. Some use it for building outdoor sculpture too. This is another porcelain paper clay sculpture. All these different parts are fully modular, and this is in someone's collection in Cape Cod. This piece is called Urchin. The urchin is actually the base of the piece, and those are barnacle-like objects on top. And in addition to being a sculpture, it's also a bit of a puzzle. The outer barnacles are all fixed to the urchin, whereas the inner barnacles are removable. And after you take it apart, there's only one way to get it back together. And so there's a key, so whoever will own this sculpture will be able to know how to put it together. Brings me to another topic that I've become very, very interested in, which is diatoms. Diatoms are microscopic single-celled organisms that help to take carbon dioxide out of the environment. They're found in the ocean, they're found in soil, and they're actually of extraordinary color, such as what you see here. There's a great variety of color, unusual shapes, including these little hoops are all evocative. So these are not exact copies of any diatoms, but evocative of looking at microscopic images. I made a second diatom sculpture, which I wanted to do in all white, which is also the color that diatoms present in. And this particular sculpture has been chosen for an exhibition done at the South Shore Art Center, which is opening tomorrow night. And this is a single diatom. I was so fond of this diatom that I made here, and this whole sculpture is about 12 inches across, that I decided to make a larger one. It's not that much larger, but this is about 6 inches across by about 4 inches high. And this has I've just gotten word that this has been selected for the National Prize Show in Cambridge this year, and that will open in May. That's the bottom side through which that is appearing. A sort of a takeoff on the idea of nests and eggs. I'm also very interested in seeds and how nature reproduces itself. So these were inspired by, this is called pods, and they were inspired by lotus pods, lotus pods. This was also later inspired by looking at lotus pods. And I don't know what pod inspired this. This is not an interactive sculpture. It is an interactive sculpture. It doesn't have movable parts that you can rearrange, but it does have movable parts because the little green balls are trapped inside, but it can be played with. And this is pod 2, which was inspired by an Asian golden rain tree pod. This was also selected for that same show on the South Shore Art Center, at the South Shore Art Center that's opening tomorrow night. This is removable, can be inserted in different angles or left inside the pod also. Completely not movable parts. This is called fossil. That's one view. Here's another view with some controlled cracking. It's actually very, very large. Was made with porcelain paper clay slip to help all these handmade, hand-rolled little cones attach inside. And sort of a new project that harkens back to the changeable views, the tabletop sculpture. This is a wall piece, fairly large wall piece. This was featured at the Fuller Craft Museum exhibit that Marilyn asked me about. And all of these different slats can be changed. One side of them actually is all one big black and white sgraffito abstract image, so they can be all lined up to create part of that image or all of it, or the flip sides, which have color and different patterns, can be used. That's the sgraffito image side. And this is called totems. Someone has bought that to enjoy in their living room in Sherborne as a meditation piece. And this is Reinventing the Wheel, for which I was a Niche Award finalist. And Reinventing the Wheel has a very different other side, also made with the shellac resist technique that I'll explain a little bit more when I actually do it for you. And now we're on to a couple of my most recent pieces, which is, this is called Half-Lives. And Half-Lives evokes many different things for different people. That's a very different view of half-lives. Some sculpture that I brought along. This is 2. And this is Trio. This guy's trapped. Doesn't come out. This one comes out. And there's one in here too. And the question is the one in here looking just like this one or not? Hopefully we'll never know. But this is a fun trick to basically build the sculpture around the already finished little seed inside. And these took their inspiration for me from looking at skunk cabbage flowers. And when I first conceived of the project after looking at skunk cabbage flowers, this is what I was going to make. I began the project over here, and I was so enamored with how this looked by itself. I couldn't bring myself to cut a hole in it, to do anything else. So I decided that this was its own sculpture, and then I went ahead and made the one I originally had in my mind. So I think the last few works I brought are some of my works that are one of a kind sort of sculptural functional pieces. So they're all completely utilitarian, but were just not conceived for the purpose of function. But they're completely food safe, and they can be used for any number of food serving or eating purposes. This is called companions. And the bottoms are carved, and the bottoms actually interact. You can turn both of them upside down, and they interact in a whole different way. And this is a nesting tower. And to close this part of the presentation, I want to thank my dear husband for his technical support. This would not be possible without him, I can tell you. And also my photographer, John Pollock. So that's that. And then, now, how do I get to the next presentation? Okay.
And do you sketch first, or is it just all up here?
Sometimes I sketch, but sometimes it's up here. So I really enjoy the engineering part of things, but a lot of that happens not at the wheel, not in my workshop. It happens as I'm doing other things. So, as I mentioned, the next slide presentation will show you some things that are visually interesting to me, and I've sort of woven it in with some of my work so that you can see how perhaps some of my ideas come about. to talk a little bit more about the shellac resist technique, and that brings me over to talking about the finished product with shellac resist technique on it, which is Spike here, which is an interactive sculpture. And I think if you're a woman and you've ever tried to wear these, you know where this is going. This work was actually picked for a publication called Humor and Craft. So it has been published. And this is the mission statement I put with the work in the book. I am yet to meet a woman who does not smile knowingly or even laugh out loud when viewing Spike. Für die Schönheit muss man leiden. For beauty, one must suffer. The fashion industry only seduced me to trying to wear too high heels for a short time in my life. It was a long time ago, yet I still do have a strong physical memory of how my feet felt after walking an unplanned distance or standing longer than anticipated in them. Spike has innumerable permutations for viewing. When all the black, orange, yellow, and white pins are removed, Spike is a trompe-l'oeil with the raised black dots disguising its holes. The pins at first glance seem to be playful pain indicators. Yet, because the pins are pointed on the ends, when we place them into Spike, we get to feel a wee bit of revenge. Spike is wheel thrown. This began as a wheel thrown piece and was altered and has hand-built components. So how I created these raised black dots was by as you can see, this is pure porcelain. Before it was fired, while it was still in the greenware state, I painted black all over black slip, which is a liquid form of clay, all over the shoe. And then I made very carefully with shellac all of these dots. The piece has not been fired yet. I took a sponge with water and I washed, after the shellac had dried, I washed the top of the shoe. And what happened is wherever the shellac wasn't, revealed the white underneath. And that's how this technique creates the raised feeling. And I don't think this is the only object here that has that. But I brought a little bowl, which this is greenware. If I were to drop it in a bucket, it would completely dissolve and become just a white liquid. And I painted on this some black slip. And on top of that, a couple nights ago, I painted this little shellac design. And now I'm going to wash it off with a sponge and let you see what happens. I didn't wear my clothes for working in clay. So the more I wash it, the more raised the black area will be. And I have to do this very gently because it can easily crack if I put too much pressure. It looks, the clay looks a different color only because it's been absorbing water from the sponge. But it will dry completely white and we'll have this raised area. So, although this is too fragile for the general public to hold, I invite you all to come play with Spike and to feel the dots. So, when I have people come visit my studio, I have one rule, which is to touch everything. Touch gently, but touch everything, because I want you to be able to play with the interactive sculpture, and I want you to be able to feel the textures and to experience the art. So when you're looking at the pieces up close, you're very welcome and encouraged to do that. And I'd be happy to answer any questions any of you have.
Yes. When you have a rattle, do you form the inside object and fire it first and then insert it in the casing? I'm not sure what comes first.
Okay, are you referring to, for example, the birch nest with the egg rattles? With those eggs that will rattles if you shake them?
Even this piece.
Yes. I'll explain to you how to do that. This is one of my nests with eggs. This is really fun to touch because these little porcelain balls give you immense satisfaction to play with in your fingers. But each one of these is a rattle. So as I let each one of you hold one of these, I'll explain to you how I make these. You're right, I make the little inside parts first. So these have little tiny balls of porcelain inside, okay? I let them completely dry. And then the eggs are made in two components. I make two tiny little pitch pots. In this case, I take two little pieces of clay, push my thumb in, and form like a half of an egg. Mm-hmm. After they've set up a little bit, they've started to stiffen up a little bit, I take that ball that I originally made, that little teeny ball or balls, if I'm putting multiples in, wrap it in newspaper, which keeps it from adhering to the egg, the external egg, as it dries. Mm-hmm. So wrap it in newspaper, which is going to burn off. And then I use scoring with a needle tool or some scratchy tool to make a rough edge on each of the two sides. Add some liquid slip, and white slip in this case because I want to keep the egg white to begin with. And then push it together, capturing that little piece of clay inside. Mm-hmm. And then comes the process of taking these rather lumpy things and shaping them the way I want to shape them, which is, it takes a little while. It's done with my hands, but it's also done with the rib that you saw me using at the beginning. I use actually a rubber rib for shaping a little bit. It's sometimes done with a little paddle to sort of pat it to get it to the right shape. And it happens over the course of not just one day, but several days. So when I first make the eggs, the outer parts, I have to let them set up and let them sit under plastic for, depending on the size, maybe half a day to a day, day and a half. And then I gradually start this process of putting them together, letting them rest at stage one when they've just been put together, let them rest in plastic, go do something else, visit them the next day. Sometimes I have to add a coil of clay around the seam to hide the seam, do some more smoothing. And so I keep working the clay as it gradually dries to be able to get a very, very smooth effect. So
like
yeah.
the mama bird, you keep visiting them and
I keep visiting them.
yeah, the mama bird, like
Yes,
"Hey,
you
what
got
do
it.
you need?"
Yes.
And
Yeah.
I see a tiny, tiny hole.
And that hole is extremely important because if I did not make that hole, thank you for bringing that up, what will happen? It will explode when it's fired in the kiln because the air inside will try to equalize and it will pop it open.
Wow.
Yeah. And so each closed form has to get at least a tiny hole. Mm-hmm.
Like
Yeah.
a baked potato in the microwave.
Something like that. Yeah.
So the nest of egg shells looked so fragile.
Oh, it's extremely fragile.
Oh,
Yeah.
so you don't want to.
Did you get to play?
Yeah.
You did. Okay. And you played before.
Many times.
Did you get to play?
I
Okay.
did.
Okay.
Here, I'll give you back so you can put it in the nest.
So let's see.
So do you just space a hole, maybe a little pin?
Yeah, I have a needle
Oh.
to make that small, because it's a small object, a needle is fine. Depending on the size of the object, I might make a slightly larger hole. So, yeah, larger size pin.
Thank you, Suzanne. I have to go, but it was wonderful.
Thank you.
I have a question. You talked about music and that being your career, and then you transitioned into doing what you're doing today. How did you choose this media, and did you experiment along the way? Was this something that you had always been interested in?
Yes, I think it was something that I had always been interested in when I was younger, and I just never had the opportunity. And then as a young professional musician, I was an entrepreneurial musician who started my own chamber group with my husband, co-artistic director. We were just so busy working over hours to bring that to life and to give success to that I didn't have time for anything else. And one day, about 17 years ago, I visited a former student's house. She just graduated and she had her first apartment, and she showed me she was actually a photographer, and she had just done a ceramics course, and she showed me something she'd made. And I said, wow, that's really cool. I've always wanted to do that. And then about a week later, one of my best friends told me that she was signing up to do a pottery class. And I said, okay, I'm doing it. This is a sign.
Yeah.
So that was it. So it was those two things coming together making me realize I needed to make room for something else in my life. And I actually thought I was just going to go once a week and do the class, and that would be it. And what I learned is you go the first day and you learn how to make something, and it kind of isn't okay, but you have to go back and visit it and take care of it. And so you look under the plastic when you get to the studio 2 days later to see how it's doing and to see what kind of attention it needs, and it's not ready. So what are you going to do while you wait for it? You're going to sit down and make something else. And so it snowballed. And before I knew it, I was going to the studio 5-6 days a week to work on something or other. And I just had so many different ideas. I started to do this as a meditation. It's just a fun diversion from my very intense work life. And it became an obsessive passion for me. So,
Thank you.
yeah, thank you for asking.
Yeah.
You probably said you have your own kiln.
I do. The kiln that you saw, and that's my own kiln. About 5-6 years ago, or maybe almost 7 years now, we bumped out the basement of our house to be able to add a kiln room. And so I was able to stop my long drive into Somerville, where I'd been doing my firing, and so that was a very, very good thing to do. Yeah.
What temperature? I mean, different depends on what you're doing.
No, generally, the clay body that I'm working in, to be completely vitrified, needs to go to 2,345 degrees, which is called cone 10 in clay speak. And everything's fired twice. The first, to bring it up to bisque, is 1,830 degrees for this particular clay body. And then to completely vitrify it, all the way up to 2,345.
How often do you make stuff? Like, what's your production speed? Or, I don't know if that makes sense.
During the school year, it's slower than during vacations in the summer. So that's a really good question. That I have the setup at home is good, but so many of these projects have a lot of engineering involved. And the ones that have engineering involved, I have to know that I'm going to be able to stop in and work on something every night or every morning for a week at a time or longer. And that's not happening so much during the school year. So a lot of the larger projects happen over the summer or in the longer vacation periods.
And also the drying times can be very, very long.
That's
So they
true.
don't
Yeah,
crack.
and they have to be long. Thank you for bringing that up. The secret is porcelain's very fussy and it tends to be very challenging. The secret to not having cracking and having the components actually stay together that you put together is to dry them at an extremely slow rate. So this, for example, to bring this to completion, probably a couple of months. Because to be able to hide the seam here and have it completely, slowly, everything dry at the same temperature, at the same humidity, before I could do the carving to the outside of this piece. And the little balls had to be made in advance, as you asked. Yeah.
Do some ceramicists, is it okay to call somebody a potter? Or?
If their primary interest is function,
Yeah.
yes,
Oh.
yes, yeah.
So some of the things you have the functional and some are made for, looking at,
Mhm.
and feeling.
Yeah.
But have there been any ceramicists who've ever tried to combine clay with gems or crystals, things like that?
I'm sure there are people who've done some experimentation in that direction. I'm sure there are some. Yeah.
For some reason or other, that reminded me of geodes. I don't know why.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because
But-
when I see it here, in my
Mhm.
vision, it almost it looks like a rock, a sort of a rock a bit,
Mhm. This is looking like a rock to you.
Well, I haven't seen it up close, but
Okay.
it does look a bit like.
Let me bring it over to you.
Oh, okay. Yeah, wow.
It's wonderful. So yeah, you might have missed my introduction.
Yeah, I did.
I said I call myself a ceramic artist or a ceramicist
Yeah.
because I tend to make one-of-a-kind art objects. I'm not a production potter. I feel like pottery is a very noble profession, and people who make things with an eye towards function and having them be really, really useful for what they're going to be used for is very admirable and very important. Function is not at the forefront of what I'm interested in doing, so I don't get to claim that. So I'm a ceramic artist, ceramicist.
Have you ever tried to make something you could make music out of?
That's not an uncommon question for me.
Yeah.
I don't know, Dan. Have I? I don't think
You
so.
made an ocarina.
What's that?
You made an ocarina.
Oh, I ended up at a very interesting workshop I was at Haystack many summers ago. Somebody in the class was teaching people how to make a certain type of whistle instrument that was used in, I think, in South America. And mine was really cool for me because it's a 2-note instrument that actually sounds like a loon call. And I love loons. And so I bring this little instrument up to Maine when we go up there, and I try to evoke calls from loons on the lake with it.
I did ask because I know they have discovered, in graves and things like that, things that you can play.
That's right. They probably did a much better job than I will ever do at that. Any other questions?
I had a question about the porcelain. You're using the porcelain and as the art. I noticed things are not very adorned. Do you really, when you paint like the birch or the raised dots, are you thinking I'm just going to enhance the porcelain, or is it are you coming from a different angle?
I like the porcelain as a palette because for me it works very well sculpturally, just dealing with form.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why when I was so excited by the form that came about when I started this project, that I decided I couldn't do it
Even the shadows
more.
in that, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
All that speaks to me, and it's very, very important to me. It does really well with the dots.
Yeah.
And the dots were very specifically the trompe-l'oeil. I was in a very playful mood with making this project. So that's what that was about. But if you have any other texture questions, I'm happy to talk about that too. With some of these more potentially functional pieces, yes, these are all fully functional. They're all food safe, except for the crystal, which I'll talk to you about. I'm using a walnut shell for doing this trail, impressing this trail on these pieces and on the bottom. And that was a wonderful find. That was really, really exciting to me. We can pass this around. And I call these pathways plates because the little paths that I rolled the walnut in, the plates dialogue to each other. And then I did different color inlay into the walnut trails.
Any of the unique parts unglazed to again show the different properties of the porcelain.
Exactly.
Right?
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Which is beautiful. I mean, so
Thank you.
smooth and
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Unlike stoneware, there's so little grog in porcelain. Yeah. And then this entire piece was textured with the exterior of this piece with the walnut, and then it was inlaid with a black glaze. Inside is something which makes this renders this completely non-functional. It's a crystalline glaze. So this is very, very sculptural because it can't be used for food. Crystal is considered a fractured surface, and so it's not food safe. But so this is purely for what happened with the crystallization in the kiln.
You mean you get particles if you try to put some food in it?
What happens if you were to put food in there? The food particles might get into the cracks in the porcelain. Yeah.
Okay, the food would hurt it, not
Right.
yeah. The food would hurt
Yeah.
it, not so much that it would hurt you.
No.
Oh, okay.
The tactile pleasure
yeah.
of holding these
It's great.
things
It's
is
too.
really wonderful.
What was that? The wheel and did you?
This is wheel thrum. Yep. And then a walnut. I ovalized it and textured it with a walnut shell, and then little wabi sabi cutting to the rim. to give it some motion.
And the bubbles on the inside rim.
Those are from the crystalline glaze.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Gift from the kiln.
Right,
With the
yeah.
chemistry of these glazes, we can't 100% predict how they're going to behave.
Mhm.
And so with crystalline, you know, it depends a little bit on how the kiln fires. The kiln is going to fire, even though mine's an electric kiln, it still fires a little bit differently from firing to firing. So the position in the kiln and, you know, if an area stayed hot, a little bit hotter longer, the crystals will grow more. So, yeah.
Is this a little symbol that you use?
That's my SS for my name. That's my signature.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
I didn't see that.
Yeah.
Did you see the crystalline?
No, I didn't see the crystal.
So you cannot make those bubbles without the crystal glaze.
Right.
You can't
See the crystal
manipulate the
formation?
porcelain
Isn't that beautiful?
without you etching in it or carving or pushing.
The bubbles came actually from the glaze itself.
Right. So
Yeah.
or the other glaze.
Yeah, yeah, yes. This also has some crystalline in it. And so I wanted to play with the idea of having crystal glaze on a functional piece, because this plate is completely functional to serve your appetizers or your sushi, and yet it's very playful because it has, and it's sculptural because it has the crystal glaze isolated in these little bubbles. I call this my triangular bubble plate.
It almost looks like a palette.
Oh yeah, interesting. So this I have it set up so it could be hung from the wall, or it could be used.
Lovely. Just gorgeous. She didn't get.
You didn't get to see this.
Where are the?
So here are the bubbles here, but you see the crystals all along in here?
No, I didn't see those. No.
So I brought along so many pieces, not just to show you, but Marilyn said, you know, you can sell things, so if anybody wants to buy anything, buy something.
Good. You need to market yourself.